Welcome to my third contribution today alone for June's TikTok Homeschool Conference, or Instagram if that's where you're watching this, on curriculum. I talked about U-Fly Foundations, then Mega Words. In this video, I want to talk about language arts more broadly, and let's talk about the different strands in language arts, and then I'm going to embed you in a week with my 10-year-old specifically. If I try to cover both of my kids, I'm not going to have enough time for the video, but I could do another video if you really want to see how it would be embedded for a different age. So before we move on to the example, embedded example, let's talk about the different strands in language arts so that we're on the same page here. I wrote them down because I'll forget what I said 2 words ago if I don't have it written down. So let's start with writing and then we'll do reading, even though they're very closely linked to one another. Writing, critical thinking, writing process, which you could still do with younger learners. You could do it at the sentence level where they are generating the ideas, writing the sentence, they are revising the sentence, and then they're making a final draft of it. So you can still do that even at the sentence level. Syntax, grammar, punctuation, let's lump those in together. Text structure, word choice, task, purpose, audience, awareness, and literary elements, devices, lump those in together. Spelling, handwriting, keyboarding, lump those in together. There's writing. For reading, we have background knowledge. If a kid does not have enough background knowledge on the content in the text, they're not going to understand the text. It doesn't matter how well they've read other texts. If they don't have enough to stick this new text to, it's going to be a lot harder for them to make meaning. Vocabulary, syntax/semantics, and then verbal reasoning is like making inferences. You can make inferences, you can make connections if you have more background knowledge from which to draw. Metaphor, simile. Then you have a knowledge of like your text, like textual knowledge. So genres, nonfiction, fiction, appendix, table of contents, that kind of thing. And then you have phonological awareness, decoding, sight recognition, and morphology. All of that in writing, but those things obviously all go together. So my recommendation to you, even if you're using a program that somebody else has built, it might be helpful for you to print out the writing rope, to print out the reading rope, have those like one on the front, one on the back, so that then you can reference those and see like which strands seem to be like weaker for your kid and how can you strengthen them? Because no program is going to be like ideal. You're still going to have to supplement. You're still going to have to recognize when your kid's not like something's not landing for them. So that's why I'm just trying to give you this information so that you can do with it however it serves you, or just ignore it altogether. That's fine too. So you might want to have them on Post-it notes or print out those 2 ropes to help you see all of the different strands. Okay. Now, next thing that I would do is to look at your week to see where you can recruit other content areas apart from like your traditional novel study in order to pull in these strands, to strengthen these strands. And so let's start first with language arts. My 10-year-old has been reading The Unteachables by Gordon Corman. I made her a novel study for it. Now, truth be told, when I designed the novel study, I put a lot of these elements into the novel studies so that everything was working together, because that's how my brain works. I like all of the connections, and so I tried to build all of it together because then I get more bang for my buck. But I can still tie these into other content areas as well. So this week, what she needs to cover for The Unteachables is at minimum chapters 4 through 7. Now, in chapter 4, I'm going to show you a little bit in here so you can see what I mean. A couple of the things that I want to work on with her, especially based on what we're covering here. One, appositive phrases. And when I teach appositive phrases to her, I will use the I do, we do, you do approach. And that is where I model it for you. Then we do this together one time, a couple times, really. And then you get an opportunity to try it for yourself. And I'm going to give her multiple opportunities to try it for herself. So for appositive phrases, I want to teach her like what actually goes into an appositive phrase, what one looks like, what one doesn't look like. So like an example, a non-example, so that she can kind of like avoid those like mistakes that I often see with appositive phrases, where to punctuate them, especially if it comes after the noun that it goes with, then you put it before and after. It's like a little swing, tucking the baby appositive phrase in. Then what we're going to do is do that with these descriptions from this chapter. So we can turn those quotes into appositive phrases that this character would use about the other characters. I did that on purpose. And so we'll use this as fodder for our appositive phrases work to start it off. Now, to reinforce this skill, because I know that even if you cover it once, that doesn't mean it's like locked and loaded in the brain. You keep going over it. So we're going to return to that when we also talk about allusions in chapter 6. So we're going to cover allusions there. And then we're going to use some of the allusions as appositive phrases. Where do we punctuate them? What goes into the allusion? That kind of thing. And again, I'm going to go back to the I do, we do, you do still for that, because this is still early stages for learning what appositive phrases are, and I really want to make sure that she understands them. Another thing that I've noticed just based on her writing, and so this is another tip that I would give to you, is just pay attention to the writing, even the less formal writing, so you can see like, hey, are they struggling with run-on sentences? Are they struggling with not knowing where to place the comma when you start with a prepositional phrase, or when you start with a subordinate clause? And so then giving them the opportunity to revise, so the writing process here, that sentence. And so even with a 10-year-old, I could just do like a mini writing process with like these sentences from her vocabulary in this novel study. So far, I have talked about literary knowledge, I have talked about writing at the sentence level, I've talked about vocabulary, I have talked about grammar in terms of appositive phrases and sentence construction, I've talked about building background knowledge, because that's part of what comes with the book, all of that, and I've just covered language arts. I also have other things that I've written down here. So you can just see if you can, if you want to screenshot that, that's what she's covering. And these are some of the things that I want to make sure that I address in the week. So just like little notes to myself. So what I have after that is for social studies, we are reading a chapter from History Quest. We're so close to the end of early times. Woo! Anyway, we're going to be reading chapter 23, China, part 1. Now, this is a great opportunity for me to give her a sentence about somebody from that chapter, and she has to fill in an appositive phrase. So she has to complete that sentence with an appositive phrase about that person from the chapter. Now, I could give her some options for appositive phrases, and then she has to pick the appositive phrase that goes into that spot for that particular person in the chapter. I can also have her do sentence completion. So we begin with a prepositional phrase, and then I'm going to have her punctuate it as necessary. We begin with a subordinate clause. She has to punctuate it and then finish the sentence so we don't have a fragment. And then we're also going to answer questions about the text. This is also building background knowledge in reading about history. And then we're also recording vocabulary as we read. So vocabulary, so important. And then one of the things that, I don't know if we're just going to write this together, the three of us, how exactly I want to handle it, but I want to have us talk about and then write about the importance of bodies of water to different civilizations, because this chapter made me realize that. And then we can go back to and review content from previous chapters. So return to some of our knowledge to make sure we're retrieving that and locking and loading it in our long-term memory. Then we have science. We've been talking about the skeletal system this week. So one way that I have covered vocabulary for that is that I stood like this and I asked them to point to where the femur was, to point to where my tibia is. And so then they had to point to some of the different bones that we learned about. And so that is one way to like pull in the vocabulary. They have also built scientific models, and they had to label the parts, so that covers vocabulary. And this is also background building. And when we read the beginning of whatever the chapter is, I have them highlight vocabulary, and we put those vocabulary words onto note cards. And then we go back and review all of that. Another way that we are reinforcing that background knowledge is we've been reading Human Body Theater, which we all think is funny, and it is very helpful for reinforcing the knowledge. So in this whole week, I'm looking at all these things and I'm like, what have I covered? And I can check off a lot of the things. I don't do it as a checklist, but just to kind of like check in with myself. Am I really like strengthening these different strands, and how can I strengthen them differently? Anyway, time is up for me. If you want me to expand on something, let me know. Thanks for watching. I hope you